This weekend, hey cool, we still have a National Park Service, even if there is currently a drive to remove almost any information that doesn't have to do with white people. Let's check out the National Historical Park that is the city of New Bedford, Massachusetts. Briefly known as the city that lights the world, the Paris of America, and the per capita wealthiest city in America in the first part of the 19th century, it was also simultaneously known as the city where a man was 100 times more likely to die than in any other location in the country. And that was due to the furious pace it was processing the source of its wealth, whale oil. While palaces to wealth were being built at one end of town, the streets and the Acushnet River ran with blood and blubber, and the stench of rotting fish hung over much of the town, all in the name of making whale oil light up the world. What nobody considered at the time was that this contribution to cheaper artificial light would do much to create major changes in how time flowed in America. As a furious commercial center with a vigorous and vocal Quaker population, it was also a major stop on the Underground Railroad. And despite the town being largely pro-segregation, it was one of the few places in early 19th century America where Black folks could more easily own legally recognized businesses and buy and sell property. The location of New Bedford at the mouth of the Acushnet River has been the home of fisherfolk long before North America was even a glimmer in the acquisitive eye of Europeans. So it's no surprise that it played a role in the American cod boom, and it continues to host fishing boats in its wide harbor even today. In 2024, New Bedford looked to reclaim a relationship with the power to light your home, as it became the site of America's first commercial-scale offshore wind farm. And this time, neither whales nor men have to die in quantity to provide the power. Oh yeah, and it smells a lot better. So if you want to find out that widow walks are a romantic made-up nonsense name, and that they were really just a way to put out the all-too-common roof and chimney fires, and see some really extraordinary ship-inspired architecture and houses, come check out the National Historic Park that is the many-layered city of New Bedford. After all, some of the residents were among the most traveled people in the world in the 19th century. Episode 155. Whales. They start to bring the kitchen indoors and change dinner time. Hello, and welcome to the History of American Food. This week I'll be looking into how artificial light provided by whales changed how people prepared food, ate and entertained, and created one of the first great urban concentrations of wealth in the United States. It would also significantly change the shape of the country. So to find out how using whales as a source of light influences how we eat today, pull up to your place at the table and let's dig in. The first thing you need to know is that just as with its preference for solid fats over liquid fats for eating, America also preferred solid fuel over liquid for lighting. While plenty of the world had figured out how to squeeze oil out of nuts and seeds, as well as fruits like olives to burn for good smells and light, America, and many of our Northern European antecedents, went with beeswax if you were rich and solid animal fats for the rest of it. We burned cow fat, in the most refined form as tallow candles, pig fat in a pinch, and if you were far up north, fish oils and seal fat. But what became the lighting standard for a large chunk of the 19th century, until coal gas and kerosene came along, was whale oil. In fact, the standard measurement of 1 candle power comes from the light thrown off by a candle of a standard size made of the spermaceti wax from a sperm whale's head. And the harvesting and processing of whale oil and the fat of other marine mammals would become one of the biggest money-makingest businesses for a few New England towns in the first half of the 19th century. What does this have to do with food, you may ask? It's a great question. After all, back in episodes 70 and 71, I made it clear that for the most part, Americans did not eat whale, but they hunted and consumed the fat by burning it. Whale hunting and burning whale fat for light has a long history, probably going all the way back into prehistory. But up until the 19th century, whale hunting had always been shore-based. You hunted the whale, you brought it back to shore, and that's where you processed it. Then, when bigger transoceanic boats were developed, navigation became less chancy, and matching food preservation techniques to allow for longer voyages followed, whaling boats were able to do more and more business offshore. As the work of the Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English sailors was spread around, and the shape of the world and its ocean currents became better and better known in North America, the idea of sailing around and all over the world went from being a foolhardy or great adventure to just another job one did for pay. The age of sail is generally thought of as the end of the 18th century and into the 19th. Then steamships arrived and changed things again. But the age of sail is also the age of the pursuit of the whale, and that is going to tip things up on an edge in ways you did not see coming, or at least I didn't see it this way until I had moved old puzzle pieces around in new ways. When people look at the moving of the big meal of the day from midday dinner to end-of-day supper, most of the blame is put on the shift of people from outdoor agricultural work to indoor factory work. Agricultural work and the realities of cooking over a fire in a world that mainly runs on natural light creates many reasons for placing the large meal of the day in the middle of the day. There's the trouble of getting the fire going, the amount of preparation when working with all minimally processed foods. That is, the cook has to do all the work of turning food into a meal. And there's much to be said for stopping work in the heat of the day, finding some shade and fueling up. But when you went to work at one whistle and ended your day at the other whistle, working for somebody else, stopping in the center for a hearty midday meal would just mess up production schedules. And all of this is true to an extent. The lunchbox lunch for the factory worker at the line did change around the order of the meals of the day. No longer would it work for the day to end with a quick sup on toast and cold leftovers, especially when breakfast was a cup of tea or coffee or weak beer and grabbed cold leftovers as one rushed out the door. And then all you had for lunch was another cold meal. With that arrangement, supper at the end of the day needed to be hot and it needed to be hearty. But that created an interesting dilemma, especially in parts of America that were industrializing the fastest. For a good 1/3 or 1/4 of the year, by the time it was supper time, it would be dark. And not just like dim dark that we think of today. Back then, when daylight went away, there were no street lights or lights from other houses. It was dark, dark. So in the daylight was the best time for cooking anything large, hot, or complex. But sure, if dinner was just stew all the time, I suppose it's not so important. The light of the fire would surely do. I mean, I guess it had to if you had no choice. But what about all those up-and-coming people with money? The architecture of rich people's houses was changing. Instead of just being a series of rooms, they started to get things like halls and dining rooms. The kitchens moved from a separate building or room out back to downstairs inside the same building. The downstairs kitchen was even true in houses of just middling wealth in urban locations. And if there's one thing that's true of the basement of any house, is it's dark, unless you bring in light. And while light from the fire might work for everyday dishes, how is one supposed to deliver the impressive dishes to dazzle one's friends when your servants are literally working in the dark? The great moving inside that began in the 19th century in line with the rise of urbanization and industrialization also required the finding of more light, specifically finding sources of artificial light. In episode 70, I did a whole ton of math about light. The big comparison I did was how much light one got from a year of beehive wax production and how much light one got from the capture of a whale. The upshot was that the most amazing beekeepers of the pre-modern or pre-box hive days, working entirely with human-powered tools for harvest, likely maxed out producing about 1,000 to 2,000 hours of light from small votive-sized candles each year. Now I was working with very round numbers, but I feel confident I'm in the ballpark. The beekeeping industry was modernizing in this age, but still, a few more thousand hours of dim light per beekeeper was so far away from the output of a whale. And the number of hours came to far less if you were talking about enough light for reading. You need more than one votive-sized candle for that. The oil from the average whale being caught by our onshore whaling guys in the 18th century came out to around 2 million hours of votive candlelight per whale. That comes out to about 2,000 years of production of one extremely efficient beekeeper. Even if the 19th century beekeeper was at the very highest end of production, I estimated each whale is still 1,000 years of beekeeper production per whale. And whalers in the 18th century were certainly capturing more than one whale a year. So you can see what was motivating the whalers. And that as the whale harvest grew, the supply of artificial light was also increasing. Back in the late medieval times, when the Basques ruled the waves, this relatively tiny community of adventurous cod-loving seafarers managed to deplete all their shore whales over a few centuries out of the Bay of Biscay. But in America, with its larger spread and much more intense shipbuilding industry, they managed to deplete their shore whales in just a few decades. Because they also had the resources of those new bigger boats, those new more accurate charts, and the new ways to preserve food, the American whaler would take up sailing over more and more of the world to chase down these enormous swimming sources of light. So sailing the world altered, once again, the finances of the whale oil business. The Basques had created a more or less luxury goods trade for the Catholic Church with their barrels of whale oil. When America got into the business, just about anyone could set up a pole on the shore of Nantucket to watch for whale sign and get a crew together and go chase a watery beast in a fine and fast rowboat and make a few good scores of whale oil for the year. But putting together a crew, equipping a ship, and hiring a captain to go a whale hunting for possibly years, that took a different kind of man, one who could make or pull together investments. And that kind of man could be found along the coast of New England. Much of the early investment in globe-scouring whale ships came from the men who had made money from munitions production and otherwise providing supplies in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. It turned out, for some of them, that they were able to make the leap from provisioning armies to provisioning ships. And at the same time, it was deemed essential to keep a large stock of trained sailors, as clearly a navy would be essential to the defense of America from other sea powers. The Whaling Fleet of America was basically the first version of the Naval National Guard, and a main center of this activity was to be found on the southern side of New England, where many rivers empty out into the Atlantic, forming favorable bays for tall ships and fishing boats. Just east of the wildly popular port of Providence, Rhode Island, and tucked under the curling bicep of Cape Cod is New Bedford, Massachusetts. It is at the head of a well-protected bay that has excellent access to the Atlantic. It is tucked behind Martha's Vineyard and is almost out of sight of that early favored shore whaling outpost of Nantucket. Somehow I highly doubt that most of those Atlantic Ocean view owners know what their land was likely used for 200 years ago. Anyway, once whale spotting stopped being a shore activity and the industry shifted to needing deep water bays for globe-trotting boats and investors to fund the voyages, the home of whale oil moved off the shorelines and concentrated in a few New England towns. New Bedford ended up being the most happening place, but plenty of other nearby towns also fit the bill. Places like Cape Cod, Mystic, Connecticut, Boston, places like that. All of them needed excellent supplies of firewood to render and refine the whale blubber. They needed plentiful water of fairly large rivers to keep the process going, and a large and not too far away market to ship the product to. The new large cities of the age were the major customers. Once again, places like New York, Boston, Newport, Charleston, Savannah, Albany, so on, as were the growing cities along the Great Lakes. The rich, isolated plantations down south with their own docks would import the whale oil along with the fancy glass lanterns to burn it in, the newfangled whalebone corsets, and the buggy whips made from whale baleen. Whale tooth ivory would start to become a material that would grace the growing number of pianos in the new drawing rooms, and the accumulation of whale teeth from toothed whales like sperm whales would play a role in the exploitation and colonization of the islands of the South Pacific. The chasing of whales to light American homes for tea parties, temperance clubs, and religious revival meetings would not only tie American whaling to China, it would also move America towards its multi-step takeover of the Hawaiian Islands. After becoming more or less firmly fixed in the sailing charts by the voyages of Captain James Cook, it first became a water and fresh food stop on the way to China, and when the otter fur trade I spoke about heated up in episode 151, Hawaii became part of the trade rotation that included sandalwood and dried sea cucumber from Pacific Ocean archipelagos. The collecting of whale teeth by American whalers contributed a trade good used to entice the participation of these islands. An interesting side note was that these voyages stretched out longer and longer and longer until some of the whaling captains started to bring their wives along. Now, these wives were not there to have a sea adventure. Rather, they saw it as their duty to bring civilization, some standards, a sense of upright religion to the whole operation. And it was quite often these sea captains' wives, after they saw the people of the islands being exploited and living in their naked, unashamed, non-Christian manner, that led them to plead for Christian missionaries to head out to these islands, which they would do in droves in the second half of the 19th century. But back to the whale oil. Since refined, whale oil was a fairly stable product. It could be shipped all around the world, to London, Paris, Madrid, Berlin, and Rome. These all took deliveries of American refined whale oil. In fact, even as San Francisco was rising up as a result of the gold fields, it was also starting to import American whale oil the long way around to light up the new fine houses out there. It would also play a role in lighting the expanding underground mines for both gold and silver and allow the men to work into the night panning their gold. It is in this first half of the 1800s that whaling truly expands. It changed from a chance find thing to a small-time industry created by small-time operators, and these converted whale oil from a specialty good into a commodity. As with any commodity that proves popular, think tobacco or cotton or sugar or cod or tea, one of the first things that happens is production increases. Why not get into the game? Clearly, it's a good idea to start producing something everybody clearly wants, and whale oil was the same. And as production increases, the prices start to drop, so what was once a thing only available to the most wealthy, and in small amounts at fabulous prices, eventually becomes an attainable luxury, and then something everyone can have, and then something everybody needs. So as a result, artificial light, specifically from whale oil, it got rolled into how society functioned. And as more people had access to more artificial light, it became easier to bring more of life inside, especially in urban settings where outside could be very crowded. It was often stinky, and it was good to be inside when it was chilly or rainy. It frankly expanded the length of the day and made it so more could be done in the inside spaces of houses. Now, it is true that most whale oils smelled of rotting fish, not because whales are fish, because they are not. Rather, it was due to the large number of sea creatures they eat. Toothed whales eat fish and squids, and baleen whales eat krill, which are just so many tiny, teeny shrimp. So those tallow candles, while they had a particular smell, they certainly weren't as outright stinky as the whale oil. So strongly scented things like patchouli from India and sandalwood from China started to enter into these homes to fight the smell and the soot. While the pure, barely scented spermaceti wax didn't give off much soot or scent, the same impurities which gave the whale oil rendered from whale blubber its fishy scent, well, they also resulted in flames that produced plenty of soot. Sure, you could work on your fancy embroidery after the sun went down, but you had new fun smells and a lot more dusting and scrubbing to do to deal with this new source of oily soot. But smells and soot aside, the start of America's indoor life had begun especially in urban areas. When everyone was more or less agricultural, life rotated around daylight. Early to bed and early to rise and all that. Barn doors that flung wide open to let in the light. But as we moved into cities and we started living closer together and then literally on top of one another, the need for indoors increased. which also increased our need for, yes, artificial light. Sure, those early factories were built to use daylight as much as possible, especially with those cool new large glass windows we started to make, see episode 117. But what about when you woke up at home in the morning when it was dark? And when you got home from the factory when it was dark? Yeah, you needed artificial light. So more and more kitchen and food prep tasks also came inside. There were clearly tasks that remained out of doors, like cleaning birds and small animals or making soap and rendering tallow. But as artificial light became cheaper and more available to more and more people, especially in cities where indoors became more important, whales, and especially their oil, would start the movement of more and more food preparation inside. The increase of artificial light would make a large meal at the end of the day more common, both by lighting up the kitchen and with the increase to ever more factory work and trains. Trains will also change the way time flows in America. We aren't there yet, but as the railway network starts to build out, especially as it starts to go west, there's the problem that sunrise and noon and sunset start to become noticeably different when you use local noon to set your watch. Telling time and keeping time mechanically are going to start to matter more, and the clock of the sun will start to matter less. So the ability to have light when the clock says you need it is going to become increasingly important. And the rise of whale oil starts to make this all possible. With the moving of the kitchen indoors and the beginnings of artificial light in them, cooking is going to become more elaborate. So the next episode, I'm going to take a look at the rise of fancy things in the American kitchen, cooking with chocolate, the development of the wedding cake, and the rise of hors d'oeuvres. The idea of courses is coming to America. Up till now, all the food arrived on the table at once and you just ate up. But that's about to change. So get ready to buy more and larger sets of china to show off just how many plates you have. Your children will be so grateful to inherit all those dishes. Thanks for listening. Any email, questions, or quibbles will continue to reach me at thehistoryofamericanfood@gmail.com. Downloading the episodes helps me know that you're out there, but even better than that are your reviews. Thank you so much for your comments and queries. From shredding cabbage, making tomato figs, and chasing cherries, I love hearing about all of it. Music for this podcast is Fingerlympics by Dr. Turtle, and you can find me on Threads, Insta, and elsewhere as @THOA Food, and all this information is available in the show description.